Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're going to build a practical voice agent, which is going to be an AI lead qualifier. So this agent is going to be able to talk to potential customers, see if they're a good fit for your business, and then guide the conversation accordingly. This agent is going to have a clear multi-step job. First, it needs to greet the user and get their name. Then it's going to ask for their project budget and timeline. Finally, it asks what service they're interested in, and based on the budget provided, it will decide if the lead is qualified or unqualified and respond appropriately. Now, you can try and do this with just one big prompt, but AI can sometimes hallucinate or get creative and go off script. So for a business process like this, we really need reliability. That's why we're using Pipecat flows. It lets us define the conversation as a series of steps or nodes in our Python code using what they call the dynamic flow pattern. This forces the AI to follow our defined path, ask the right questions in order, and use the information correctly. And to make the interaction more engaging, we won't just have audio, we'll connect our agent's voice output to a realistic AI avatar. So the user will see and hear the AI agent speaking throughout the qualification process. So in this tutorial, we'll go step by step through the Python code, writing the logic functions to save information and control the flow, and integrating HeyGen into the Pipecat pipeline. By the end, you'll have a complete, reliable voice agent that should look a little something like this.
Welcome to our creative agency. I'm here to help you get started. May I have your name, please?
Yeah, my name is James.
Thank you, James. To help us find the best fit for your needs, could you share your approximate project budget?
Yeah, I think my budget is around 6,000.
Got it. And what is your ideal timeline for this project? For example, are you looking to get started ASAP, within a few weeks, or on a specific date?
Yeah, I'm looking to get started within a few weeks.
Great, James. And finally, could you tell me what specific service you're looking for? For example, do you need a new website, automation for your business, or something else?
I'm looking for automation for my business.
That sounds like a great fit for what we do. To get you booked in with one of our specialists, could you please share the best email address to send your calendar invite to?
Yeah, it's jim@gmail.com.
Thank you for your time, James. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day.
Our avatar agent showed up with the voice that we chose from Cartesia, and it accurately followed the conversational flow we set up with Pipecat flows. So that was our AI lead qualifier in action. It greeted the user, asked the questions in order, and correctly determined if the lead was qualified, handling the conversation ending perfectly. But how did it stay on track, and how did it know what step came next? That's the power of Pipecat flows, and this flowchart right here is the exact blueprint of the logic I built. So let's quickly walk through it. Naturally, we start the conversation. The first active step is the greeting node. So here our agent introduces itself and asks for the user's name. Once the user provides their name, that triggers our first Python function, which is the handle name handler. This function grabs the name and saves it into the bot's memory, which we call state. The handler then tells the flow manager to transition to the next step, which is the get budget node. Here, our agent asks for our budget, and then the handle budget handler runs, which saves the budget to the state and transitions us to the get timeline node. Here, it's just the same pattern. The bot asks for the timeline, the user responds, and then the handle timeline saves it and transitions us to the final question, which is the get service node. At this node, our agent is going to ask what service our user needs, and when the user answers, this triggers our most important handler, which is handle service and qualify. So what this handler does is it first saves the requested service, whether that's a website design or custom AI automation. Then it performs the core qualification logic, checking the budget it saved earlier. And for this tutorial, we're just going to use a simple benchmark of 5,000. So if the user's budget is anything under 5,000, we're going to say it's not qualified. But if it is, we're going to lead it down this qualified path, where the agent tells the user they're a good fit and asks for their email. When the user provides the email, the handle booking handler is going to run, and this handler is going to pretend like it's saving a lead to the database or sending information to the user's email. If the user is not qualified and the budget is under 5,000, we're going to move to this unqualified lead node, and we're going to have our agent politely explain that it's not a good fit. After the user acknowledges this, the handle end conversation handler runs, and its only job is just to transition to this end node, and both qualified and unqualified paths merge here. This node handles the final goodbye message, and finally the flow reaches its end. So as you can see, this flowchart provides a clear step-by-step structured path for the conversation, and by defining these nodes and handlers, we make sure that the agent asks the right questions in the right order and makes decisions reliably based on the information it gathers. So this eliminates the randomness you might get with one large single prompt. But now that you've seen it in action and understand a little bit of how it works, let's jump into the code. All right, so the first step in all this is we need to set up our Pipecat voice agent. So I'm gonna search up Pipecat voice quick start, and it'll usually be this first link. So click here on quick start, and then we can just go through this whole guide and it'll lead us through step by step what we need to do. So as you can see, it says this quick start guide will help you build and deploy your first Pipecat voice AI bot. Now, the first step is local deployment. So we can scroll down a bit and see what the first actionable step is. So we need to clone the quick start repository and they give us a command to do so. So I'm just going to copy this and then head over to your IDE. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be using Cursor. So in Cursor, I'm just going to open up a new project and click on new folder. And I'm just going to call this Pipecat Flows Agent. And I'll click create and I'll open that. All right, cool. Now that we are in the project, we want to pull up the terminal, and on Mac, you can do that by pressing Control/. And once you have this terminal pulled up, we're going to paste in what we copied from the docs. So I'm going to click enter, and this should clone the Pipecat voice agent starter repository. And we're actually now in that folder that we just made. So you see the Pipecat quick start folder we're inside of. So if I then press LS, and if I open up this folder, we have everything we need. All right, so briefly, I wanted to go over this bot.py because this is basically the heart of our agent, and it's not too long. It's about 150 lines or so. So going through it really quickly, we start off with our imports. We bring in standard libraries like the operating system and .env to load our API keys, and then log u for logging. Then we have the important Pipecat stuff. So these imports are for audio processing. We import the Celero VAD analyzer for voice activity detection. So that helps the agent to know when we stop speaking. And then we use local smart turn analyzer v3 to help manage the back and forth of the conversation. Then we get into our pipeline core. So things like pipeline, pipeline runner, pipeline task. These are the main engine parts that run our bot. And then past that, we start importing our AI services. So we're going to be using DeepGram for speech to text, OpenAI as the LLM or the brain of our agent, and then Cartesia for text to speech. So that'll be giving a voice to our agent. We also have our LLM context. So LLM context is going to be holding the conversation history for us. And also transport. Transport is basically the way that data flows in and out of our computer. So when we speak to our computer, we're going to be transporting our data, which is raw speech frames, into text. And when our agent is done speaking, we're going to be using transport to get a voice response from Cartesia from our computer to our speakers. All right, so enough of the imports. Let's get into the main function, which is run bot. This function is like where we put all the pieces together. You can think of this as like a recipe. So first off, we're initializing our services that we imported. And then we're setting a prompt in this messages variable. So messages is a list of dictionaries, and these dictionaries are basically AI messages. So the way these dictionaries work is the key is always role, and then the value will either be system, assistant, or user for whoever's speaking. And as we progress through the conversation, we're going to be using this context aggregator to store our conversation. Then we get into the pipeline. You can think of the pipeline as like the main conveyor belt for our conversation flow. So we start off with transport user input, and that's the audio that comes in from the browser. So that's what we speak to our computer. And then RTVI just handles real-time processing like interruptions. And then we have our speech to text where audio becomes text. And when we call the user method on this context aggregator variable, what's happening is the user's text gets added to the history. And then now in this LLM variable, the history goes to the LLM for a response. And the LLM's text response becomes audio in this text to speech variable. And then when we call the output method on transport, that's when the bot's audio goes out to the browser. And then finally, we have context aggregator assistant to make sure that we are adding the assistant's response to our conversation history. And then moving on, we see this task variable. We're basically wrapping the pipeline in a pipeline task so it's ready to be run. And then we have these two important event handlers, basically when we connect and disconnect from the call. So on client connected, when you connect, this method will run. What this does is it adds another system message telling the LLM to introduce itself and then sends that LLM run frame signal to make the LLM start talking. And then on client disconnected cleans things up when you close the tab. And then finally, we have this pipeline runner. And what we do here is basically start the whole process by calling the run method on this runner and passing in our current task, which we defined up here. Lastly, we have our bot function in our entry point. So this function just sets up the specific connection details. And then this is just standard Python boilerplate to make the script runnable from the command line. So yeah, that's the starter bot. Gets a response, speaks it back, and keeps track of the conversation. So let's head back to the docs to see what the next step is. All right, so we finished cloning the repository and we took a look at this Pipecat quick start directory. The next step is configuring our API keys and creating our environment file. So what's nice is they provide the actual links to get our API keys. So what we'll do is copy this command right here to make our environment file and head back to the code. All right, so in this Pipecat flows agent, we'll pull up the terminal once again, making sure that we're in that Pipecat quick start directory that we cloned. Let's run that command that we copied from the docs. And now we can see we have this new .env file. And it already has the spaces where we need to paste our keys into. So if we go back to the docs, let's just follow all those links and grab our API keys one by one. So we're going to need 3 total. All right, so first up is Deepgram. So let's scroll up a little bit to this link right here. So let's click that and grab our Deepgram API key. So I'm going to log in and I'm going to head over to API keys on the left-hand side. And I'm going to click on create new API key. And I'll call this one Pipecat flows. And I'll click on create key. Now I'm going to copy this and head back to the code. So back in the code, I'm going to delete this and paste in that Deepgram API key. Now let's grab our OpenAI API key. So back to the docs. So let's click on this middle link and we're going to be asked to sign in. And now once you're on this page, just click on create new secret key. So I'm going to call mine Pipecat key and click that. I'm going to copy this and back in the code. And in this .env file, I'm going to delete your OpenAI API key and paste in what we just got from OpenAI. All right, let's go ahead and grab the last key. So in the docs, let's click on Cartesia. And then once you log in, so on the left-hand side, click on API keys. And then on the top right, click on new. And I'm going to create my Pipecat flows key and I'll click on create. Now I'm going to copy this and head back to the code. And in this last spot, I'm going to paste in Cartesia API key. Okay, cool. So let's save that. Okay, cool. So now we have the repository, our API keys, and now we have to run a couple of commands. So we have to run this UV sync to set up our environment and install our dependencies. And then we can just run the file with uv run bot.py. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Copy this. All right, so we're going to run that UV sync command. And as we can see, we downloaded a bunch of dependencies, a lot of them being what we need for our different AI services. So you can see Cartesia right here. Maybe scroll down a little bit, we can see OpenAI and different things we need for formatting like Pydantic. And all of our dependencies come from this pyproject.toml file, which came with the GitHub repository that we cloned. All right, so now we are good to just run the voice agent. So let's kill that in the terminal. And remember, the command to do so is uv run bot.py. So I'm going to click enter, and then our terminal is going to give us a local host link, which we can follow to then speak with our voice agent. So let's go ahead and run this. And we can see it says 20 seconds for the first run only, so this might take a little bit longer. But we can already see our imports are loading successfully, like our Smart Turn Analyzer and our Solero VAD model. Okay, so now we see that our bot is ready. So we need to open this link as it says in our browser. So I'm going to click that. All right, so now we're in our Pipecat UI. We can see here localhost 7860/client. And our messages should show up here if our connection to our agent is successful. So I'm going to go ahead and click connect.
Hello, I'm an AI assistant here to help answer questions, offer advice, or just chat. If you need information or a bit of support, just let me know how I can help.
Awesome, thanks. Can you just tell me a fun fact about San Francisco?
Absolutely. Here's a fun fact. San Francisco's iconic cable cars are the only moving National Historic Landmarks in the United States. They've been transporting people up and down the city's steep hills since the late 1800s, and you can still hop on for a ride today.
Got it, thank you.
You are welcome. If you have any more questions or just want to chat, feel free to ask. Have a great day.
Awesome. So we see that our agent is showing up and we can speak with it and see our conversation transcript right here. So now I'm just going to disconnect and let's continue building this thing out. And back in the code, we can just stop the agent right now by running Control-C and we can clear this out really quickly. Okay. All right. So now we have our basic chatbot running. Now let's introduce the core component of Pipecat flows, which is the flow manager. You can think of the flow manager as the director of our conversation, telling the LLM what scene we're in and what its lines are. So at the top of this file, we need to add a couple of imports, and these are going to be from Pipecat flows. So right under here, just paste this in. And we also have to install Pipecat flows. Now you can do this by running uv add pipecat-ai-flows and click enter. And now just to double check, in our TLML file, we have Pipecat flows in our list of dependencies. Okay, so to explain these imports, first off, we need flow manager because we are going to make a flow manager object, and that's what's going to direct our conversational flow. We're going to use node config to define our conversational steps. We need flows function schema to define the tools which the LLM can use, and flow args for our handler functions. Okay, so let's get into the code now. Like I said, flow manager is going to orchestrate the flow outside of the main pipeline. So if we scroll down a little bit, we're going to initialize it right before we define our event handlers like so. So far we are passing it in this task, which we wrap the pipeline in. We are setting our LLM, which we set above right here. We are setting the context aggregator, which we have set in line 84. And then we are also passing in the transport, which is a parameter that is passed into this runBot function. Okay, cool. So we have Flow Manager initialized. It has all the pieces it needs to control the conversation. Notice we're not putting the Flow Manager in this pipeline list. The reason being is the pipeline remains our conveyor belt for text and audio processing, while Flow Manager is going to act as the external controller. All right, so now we're just going to create our first node, which if you can remember from the flowchart is this create greeting node. So let's go back to the code and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so first step is after we load the environment variables, we're going to create a new function that is create greeting underscore node. And this is going to return a node config or a blueprint for what the node is supposed to do. We can go ahead and write return node config, and then we can start defining the parentheses right here. So the first thing we want is the name, and we're going to call it greeting. And then the next thing we want to input are the task messages. So I'm going to indent this a little bit. And this task messages is going to be a list of dictionaries. And so the first dictionary has two keys, role and context. Like I mentioned previously, the value is always either system, assistant, or user. So we're going to write system. And then for the content, we're going to say, greet the user warmly, introduce yourself, and ask for their name. Wait for their response. So that are the task messages. For now, we'll just leave it at that. And the last thing we have to define is the functions list. So I'm going to come down here and write functions is equal to, and then a pair of brackets. And I'll open these up and we can start defining our function. And we want our function to be an object of this flows function schema type. So we can write that in right here and start defining. So the first thing we need to do is give our function a name. So I'm going to call this core underscore name. And then for the second line, I'm going to write in handler, which we're going to write later, but we'll call this handle name. Now we're going to make this node first, and then we'll write this handler in a little bit. Now, the third thing that we need to define for this flows function schema is a description. So we're going to say, call this function when the user provides their name. And that's the basic description that the LLM is going to see when it decides whether or not to call this function. Then we're going to give it another variable, which is properties. Now, properties is going to be a list of parameters, you can think of it, that it needs to be able to call this function. Now, this is a dictionary, so we're just going to need one key. And for this record name function, that key is going to be name. So I'm going to write in here name. And then we also have to define the type. And we'll do that using another dictionary. So I'll say type, string, using the required parameter. Okay, so we have everything almost fully set up. Now we just need to write the handler. So I'm going to come down here and write in handler so we can divide the sections. And this handler is the basic function that this node performs. So these functions up here that return node config are the nodes itself, and the handlers are defining the action that the node has to take. So this one's going to be called handle underscore name. And then for the argument, we're going to take in flow args. And then we're also going to be passing in flow manager, which is an instance of that flow manager variable. Now, these handlers, it is important to understand what they return. So they return a tuple. The first value is usually something insignificant. Like if you wanted this value to log the console, you could pass in something right here. Otherwise, you can just put none. And the second part is the node config. This part of the return value is where we go after executing this handler. So that's how we chain together the nodes. So if we had node 1 and node 1's handler was handle name, to decide where to go next from this node, we'd return node 2 in this second part of the tuple right here. So that's basically how we connect all the nodes. Now for the actual code, that we're going to receive the name in this flow args variable that our LLM will set. So the way that we access name is by basic indexing. So we're going to say args and then type name. And we're going to log this to the console. So we're just going to write logger.info. And then we're going to use the f string to say user's name is, and then we're going to write args.name. And this should basically log to the terminal our user's name. Now, the flow manager has a dictionary called state. So this state has a bunch of keys connected to different values. So we want to update the state so that it takes this name and sets it in the state dictionary. The way you do that is by running the update function and then passing in brackets, just like so, saying the name variable in this state dictionary is equal to the name that we got passed in from the argument. So all that we're doing here is this node will call the handler, passing in this name property that we required. And we are going to be setting this in the state so that when we access this flow manager.state dictionary, we'll always be able to access the name no matter which node we're at. And then lastly, we just need to return this tuple. So what we're going to do is return parentheses and we'll say none. And then for the node config, we'll just go back to that first node that we created for now. So it'll be kind of like a conversation loop. So this node will run, it'll run the handler, and then once we run the handler, we are going to return the same node just to see the proof of concept for now. So just to recap what we did right here, create greeting node defines the prompt that we set right here. And the only tool the LLM can use is this record name function. Now, once again, in functions, we aren't just giving it a name. We have to pass it this flows function schema object to define the function before we actually implement it in handle name. But nevertheless, this flows function schema links the name to the actual handler, and our handle name function just logs the name, saves it to this flow manager state dictionary, and then remember, just for this step, returns the create greeting node that we defined up above. So it's just going to tell the flow manager to simply restart the greeting step after getting the name. There is one more addition we have to make in the code, and that is to update our on client connected. So if I scroll down here to the handler function, instead of messages.append and await task.queue frames, we can get rid of both of these lines. And we're going to start the flow manager. We do that by writing await flow manager dot initialize, and then we pass in that create greeting node that we defined up above. So once again, we are no longer manually triggering the LLM with LLM run frame in this on client connected function because the flow manager is what's going to handle that automatically now. Also, I believe I had a syntax error right here with a colon, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Let's just do one more thing really quickly. We actually don't need this messages list we defined in our run bot function. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this and make sure that we're not passing it into this LLM context object right here, because we're giving our LLM instructions through our node that we created as opposed to just using that messages list. All right, so now let's just test speaking with our agent in that same localhost 7860 that we were in before. So I'm going to go ahead and run uv run bot.py, and we'll see if we get any errors. Okay, so far so good. I'm gonna go back to the client. So now I'm gonna speak with our agent and test that we successfully set up our first node. Let's go on connect. It should ask for our first name and then have a natural conversation with us.
Hello, I'm ChatGPT, your AI assistant. It's great to meet you. What's your name?
Hey chat, my name is James.
Nice to meet you, James. How can I assist you today? If there's anything you'd like to talk about or need help with, just let me know.
Yeah, can you just tell me a fun fact about San Jose, California?
Absolutely. Here's a fun fact about San Jose, California.
Okay, so I'm gonna disconnect and let's take a look at the logs. So I'm gonna quit the agent, but we can actually go through step by step and actually prove that our node was created. So scrolling all the way up top, the first thing we want to look for is that on client connected initialize our flow manager. So we can see here, after we say client connector, we have initialize flow manager and we set the initial node as greeting. And in the code, that is the exact name of our greeting node. So we know that we successfully connected to the first node. And we also registered the function record name. So now let's see that we actually used this function when the assistant asked us about our name. So let's scroll down a little bit after the text to speech. User started speaking, and then after user stopped speaking. So at this point, it has my response. We can see that it concatenated to the context. So the role is the user and the content is, hey, my name is James. And then we can see what happened after this. So if we scroll down a bit, the OpenAI LLM service actually called our function record name with the required arguments that we asked for name is equal to James. Then it confirmed that we called the function and then logged with the terminal user's name is James, exactly where we did that in our handler. So we can see right here, user's name is James, and that is what we got in the terminal. Then after that, we can see that it successfully transitioned back to the first node after running the handler, which is greeting. Okay, cool. So we have successfully set up the first node. We just need to keep building out our lead qualifying system. So at this point, we just have our start and greeting node, and then we handle saving the name with our handler. Let's go one step further and create the get budget node, and that'll have our agent ask for our budget and then save it with the new handler. So let's get back into the code. All right, so right under this create greeting node, let's just write in create budget node with parentheses. So we're going to return this node configuration object. So the first thing we want to do is pass in this flow manager, because this flow manager object is what contains the state dictionary that has our updated name. And then we can just access the name by writing in name is equal to flow manager. Let's access the state dictionary, and then we have to run a dot get, and let's put in name. And if we don't have name, we can just get there and we'll have the agent say hello there. Okay, so continuing, let's start editing the return value. So we're going to call this node get underscore budget. And then for the next value, we're going to write in role underscore messages. And we'll define that in a little bit. But before that, I want to actually define a global role messages variable so we don't have to keep passing it into each node. So I'm going to paste this in. And once again, you can get all of this code from my GitHub repository, which I linked in the description. So what I do is define system prompt that I said, you are a friendly and professional AI assistant for a creative agency. Your goal is to qualify new leads by asking a few simple questions. You must always use the provided functions to progress the conversation. This is a voice conversation, so keep your responses natural and concise. Do not use emojis or markdown. Then I'm just going to paste in role messages. Okay, cool. So now we have the system prompt and the role messages, and we'll make sure to include that in the first node. So we can write in here, role messages is equal to the role messages we just set. Now let's go back down to the node that we were working on, which is this create budget node. And in this role messages, we can just pass in the same thing like so. Okay, cool. So next we want to define the actual task for this node. And what this node is going to do is we're going to have it ask the user for the budget of their project. So we're going to write in task underscore messages. And we want this to be a dictionary, but we can expand it a little bit. So we know the role is going to be from the system because it's going to be telling the assistant what to do. And then for the actual content, we can write in content as the key. And then what we're going to be saying is the cursor has it close, but we want to write in thank you name. So if I say, hey, my name is James, it's going to say thank you, James. Then actually just delete this there variable that we had up top. Okay, cool. So the task says, thank you, whatever the name is, to help us find the best fit for you. What is your approximate project budget? And then it says, wait for their response. Next, we want to include the actual functions that it has access to. And again, we're just going to define a handler in that flows function schema object. So let's start editing this. First, we want the flows function schema. And we want to name this function. And again, it could be pretty confusing because the function is just an object name with a handler linked to it. But nevertheless, we're going to call this function record budget. The handler is going to be handle budget, which we're going to define very soon. And then we want to write in the description. And what we're going to say is call this function when the user provides their budget. Next, we want some properties. And the properties we need for this is obviously the budget. So that's going to look a little bit like this. Budget, and then type is going to be number. And we can specify a little bit more by writing description. And we can specify that the user's approximate project budget in dollars. And lastly, we just need to require that budget variable. So we can't call this function if the user has not provided their budget in their response. Okay, cool. So let's save that. Okay, so let's go over this create budget node. Actually, I ought to get right in there so it's a little bit more clear. Okay, so first off, we're using Flow Manager. We're passing that into this function. Why? Because we want to personalize the message. So when we do state.getName, that retrieves the name we saved in the previous step from the Flow Manager state. We do that so we can use an F string in the task messages to include the user's name directly in the prompt. And then we'll define the next tool the LLM will need, which is record budget. We've set the handler to handle budget, which we'll create in the next step. So let's create one more node. And then this is going to be create get timeline node. And for this one, we're just going to leave out Flow Manager because we don't need to pass in the name. And then like always, we're going to be returning a node config object. So this get timeline node is going to be asking for the user's timeline on their project. So once again, let's return a node config object and we can start defining what we want to return. So the name is going to be get underscore timeline. The role messages parameter is going to be set to that global role message variable from above. And we're going to define its task like so. So this variable is going to be a list of a dictionary. So the role is going to be system. And then for the content, we're going to say, got it. And what is your ideal timeline for this project? Within 3 months, wait for their response. All right, so let's continue. Next, we need to include the function that this node has access to, which is going to be a function to record this timeline. So let's write here functions, and it's going to be a list of the flows function schema object. So let's define it like so, flows function schema. The name will be record timeline. And then we're going to define a handler called handle timeline. And for a description of this function, we are going to say, call this function when the user provides their project timeline. The one property we need is the timeline, which is going to be a string. So let's write that in really quickly. Properties, we want a dictionary, and we're going to say timeline. And then type is going to be a string. All right, cool. And then we just need one more property, which is required. And obviously that's going to be that timeline variable we were asking for. So what this means is in order to call this function, you have to take the timeline from what the user said. So let's say my timeline is 3 months. The LLM would automatically parse that our timeline is 3 months and then call that function with this parameter. So that's another handler we have to write in. But as of now, we have 3 nodes we created. So we started off with our create greeting node. We made our create get budget node, and then we have our get timeline node. So we have about 3 nodes. We only have one handler written out, but let's make one more node before we get into the handlers. And this node is going to be the create get service node, which is going to ask the user what service they specifically want. So it's going to ask them, okay, do you want a new website build? Do you want some help with your marketing? Whatever it is, that's the role of this node. So we're going to return another node config object, and let's start defining. So the name is going to be get services. We're going to pass in the role messages again. And for the task of this node, obviously it's going to be a system message, and we're telling it what to say. So it's going to say great. And finally, what specific service are you looking for? And then we just listed out a couple of different services like AI avatar, automating my business, or a new website. And as you know, we have to add one more thing, which is the actual functions list. So let's do that right now. functions is equal to, and then let's do an empty list, and then this flows function schema object. And you can write it in like so. Let's tap. Okay, cool. So the name of this function is record, service, and qualify. And we'll define the handle, service, and qualify handler a bit later. For the description, we're going to say call this function when the user describes the service they need. This is the final step before qualification because we want to make sure that our user is qualified. And then obviously we need the properties, which is the actual service, whether that's a new website, automating my business. And we have to require that the LLM has that in order to call this function. All right, so let's do a brief recap of these three nodes that we just made. We now define the functions that create these different node config objects for the main sequence of our conversation. So the initial greeting, hey, how's it going? What's your name? And then asking what the user's budget is, and then asking for their personal timeline and service that they're asking for. Each node specifies the prompt for this LLM with these different task messages, as well as the different tool it should use as we define in these different function lists. But right now, if we were to actually run this, we would receive some errors because we didn't actually define any of the handlers that save the budget, timeline, or service. And we haven't updated our initial handle name handler to transition to the next node. So that's exactly what we'll do in the next step. Let's start implementing the handlers to save the data and move the conversation forward. So the next handler we're going to implement is the handle budget handler. So we're going to call it handle budgets. For the parameters, we're going to take in the flow args like above, as well as the flow manager, which is the director of our conversation. And then we're going to return this value again, which is just basic Pipecat syntax. The first value is insignificant, but the second value is where the node should lead to. We are first going to extract the budget from the arguments, just like so, and then log that to the terminal. Okay, so now we have to update the state dictionary inside of Flow Manager, and we're going to do that exactly like so. And then we're going to return none in the next node that we have to go to, which is just that create get timeline node. Because as you can remember, we asked for their name, their budget, and then their timeline sequentially. Next, let's implement the handle timeline handler, and you can input it exactly like I have it here. So what we're doing is basically the same thing as we were doing above. We are logging to the terminal of the timeline, updating the timeline variable in the state dictionary, and then returning the next node to go to, which is our get service node. We do have to fix one more thing. I believe I made a mistake in the handle name handler. So instead of returning create budget node, remember we renamed it to create get budget node. So we have three handlers for the first three nodes, and that is the greeting node, the get budget node, and the get timeline node. But for this get service node, we still haven't implemented this handle service handler because that's going to be a bit more complicated than what we have right now. So just point its handler to the handle name handler just as a dummy node for now, just so that we can test that our flow works before we implement this handler. All right, so now let's run this file and test that our agent asks for our name and greets us. Then it asks for our budget, timeline, and service in that order. So I'm going to come down here and run the same command, uv run bob.py. And let's check if we get any errors. All right, cool. Looks like everything's loading successfully. So I'm going to head over to the front end. I'm going to go ahead and click connect and wait for our agent.
Hi there. Thanks for reaching out to us. I'm your assistant from the creative agency, and I'm here to help you get started. May I have your name, please?
Yeah, my name is Jim.
Thank you, Jim. To help us find the best way to support your project, could you let me know your approximate project budget?
Yeah, my budget is about 6,000.
Got it, Jim. What is your ideal timeline for this project? For example, are you aiming for completion within a few weeks, months, or do you have a specific date in mind?
Yeah, I'm looking for it to be finished within a few months.
Thanks for sharing your timeline, Jim. To help us better understand your needs, can you briefly describe the type of project you're looking to start? For example, is it a branding project, website design, video production, or something else?
Yeah, I'm looking for a website design.
Great. Thank you for letting me know you're interested in website design. I have your timeline and budget noted. Is there anything specific you'd like the website to achieve, such as showcasing your work, generating leads, or supporting online sales?
That's it. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Jim. Thank you for sharing your details with me. Someone from our team will reach out soon to discuss your website project further. Have a great day.
All right, so it looks like it works and we were able to control the conversational flow of our agent. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect and let's take a look at the logs to get a better understanding. All right, so I'm going to kill this agent really quickly. You can see here after I connected, the flow manager set the initial node to greeting. Then after I gave my name Jim, the log showed the record name function was called and logged my name to the terminal. And also, which is really important, it transitioned to the get budget node. The bot then asked for the budget and I provided it with 6,000. We can probably find it a little bit down here. So right there. And it called the record budget function with the correct argument as budget set to 6,000 and then correctly transitioned to the next node, which is get timeline. Same thing for timeline. So when it asked me my timeline, I said a few months, and it called the record timeline function, as we see here, and transitioned to the last node we made, which was get services. Finally, when I told the agent that what I wanted was website design right here, the record service and qualify function was called. But if you can remember, we temporarily pointed its handler to handle name. So that's why we see this error and transition function record service and qualify name, which is exactly what we expected because the handle name tried to access the name parameter in our arguments, but the arguments for record service and qualify only contained service needed. All right, so the logs confirm it. Our bot successfully moved through each step, called the correct handlers, saved the name, budget, and timeline to the state, and then hit that error we were expecting. So let's keep building. So right now we need 3 more nodes, one for qualified leads, one for unqualified leads, and then one end node. So let's go ahead and create those right now. The first one is going to be create qualify node, like so. And then again, we're going to return a node configuration object. The name will be qualify underscore lead. We also need to pass in the role messages like so. And then for the task messages, we're going to say that sounds like a perfect fit for our team. The last step is to get you booked in with a specialist. I can do that for you now. What is a good email address to send the calendar invite to? And then lastly, of course, we need our functions, which is going to be that flows function schema object type. So I'm just going to write it in like so. And then inside of this object, we're going to call this function book meeting. The handler will be handle booking. And then for a quick description, we're going to say call this function when the user provides their email address. And then the property we want is email because obviously we want to use their email to send them a booking or something like that. So basically all this node does is provides positive feedback, asks for the email, and then provides the book meeting tool. And then now that we have this qualified node, we need to make the unqualified node. So we're going to call that create unqualified node and return a node configuration object like so. And then inside of that, we'll call this not underscore qualified underscore lead. We'll pass in the role messages. And for the specific task messages of this node, we want to say, thank you for all that information. Based on your needs, it sounds like you might not be a perfect fit for our services right now. So just something simple. Then lastly, we need the actual function call. For this one, we'll do the same as always. We'll call the function end conversation and call its handler handle end conversation. The quick description is call this function to acknowledge the user and end the conversation politely. We don't need any properties or anything required because now at this point we are done with the call. So we don't need any specific conversational flow besides just saying goodbye. All right, so this node gives us our polite rejection. And now let's create that end node I was talking about. So we'll write in create end node, return the same object. And then inside of these parentheses, we're going to call this end, pass in the role messages. And then for the task messages, we're going to say, thank the user for their time and say a polite and professional goodbye. Now we're still going to initialize functions, but just keep it as an empty list. All right, so now we have our final terminal node. It has a prompt for the LLM to say goodbye, but crucially has this empty functions list, which signals the end of the flow. Next, let's finally implement the handler for the get service node. So if you can remember, we were going to call it handle, service, and qualify. Now let's scroll down to where we initialize our handlers and we can make another one. So this is going to be handle, service, and qualify. Like always, passing in the flow arguments and flow manager with the same return value. We're going to log to the terminal the service that the user needs, and then update the state like we've been doing with flow manager.state.update, make a dictionary with service, and then grab it from the arguments like so. Okay, so next, this is where we're going to write in our qualification logic. So let's retrieve the budget from the state, and we can do that by going flow manager.state get budget like so, and we can just default to 0 if nothing is found. Okay, and we're going to use a simple if else. So if budget is greater than or equal to 5,000, that means we're going to go to the qualified node. So we'll just log to the terminal user is qualified like so, and then return that tuple, which is none, and then create qualified node. And then for the else block, we're going to write user is not qualified and then redirect to the unqualified node like so. So this handler is important. It saves the service needed to the state dictionary, retrieves the budget, and returns the appropriate next node based on whether their budget is high enough. And we need to add one more handler, which is just handle booking. So we'll write it in like so. This will be somewhat of a dummy handler, so I'm just going to paste this in. But basically what we're doing is this handler is going to log all the information that we collected. So it's kind of simulating like we're saving it in some sort of database. And then it transitions to the final create end node. Also, let's add one more handler to actually end the conversation like so. And we'll just have this handler route us to the end node similar to what we're doing above. All right, now that we have these handlers, just make sure that in your get service node, you don't have that handle name like we had before, but we have handle, service, and qualify in there. And I think I made a quick typo right here. So instead of facing, all right. Now let's run this file and we should have everything we need. So I'm going to go step by step through the flowchart where the agent will greet us, ask for our budget, then our timeline and our service. And based on what we said, it'll route us to either the qualified or unqualified node and then converge back to the end node. So let's pull up the terminal and I'm going to run uv run bot.py. And looks like we don't have any errors. So I'm going to head over to the front end. I'm going to connect and we should see our conversational flow working.
Hello. Welcome to our creative agency. I'm here to help you get started. May I have your name, please?
Yeah, my name is James.
Thank you, James. To help us find the best fit for your project, could you please share your approximate budget?
Yeah, but I'd say my budget is around 7,000.
Got it. And what is your ideal timeline for this project? For example, are you looking to get started ASAP, within a few weeks, or a specific date?
Yeah, I'm looking to get started within a few weeks.
Thank you. Lastly, could you tell me what specific service you're looking for? For example, do you need a new website, a custom AI solution, or something else?
Yeah, I'm looking for a custom AI solution.
That sounds great, James. To book you in with a specialist, could you please provide your email address so I can send you a calendar invite?
Yeah, my email is james@gmail.com.
Thank you for your time, James. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Okay, so let's disconnect and take a look at the logs. All right, so I'm going to kill the agent. It sounds like the conversation went as expected. So I just want to go through the logs here to confirm that the qualification step passed. So let's go ahead and look for it. If you scroll up above, we see that we correctly logged all of our information like our names, budget, timeline, service, and email. And that was when we called the book meeting function. So that means that our agent correctly qualified us. And then if you scroll a little bit up past this part, okay, so we see user is qualified. And we were able to correctly route it to the qualified lead node here as we see transition to function return qualified lead because our budget was above that 5,000 benchmark. Okay, so really cool. We have a fully functioning conversational flow using Pipecat flows. Let's customize our agent a little bit by adding an AI avatar. For this tutorial, we're going to be using a HeyGen real-time avatar. So first, let's just prepare our .env file to accept our HeyGen API key. So you can just write it in like so, and then we'll head back to the browser to actually retrieve it. So what you can do in the docs is click on server APIs and then scroll down to where it says video and then click on the first one, which is HeyGen. We can see here, HeyGen is an AI avatar video generation service for creating interactive conversational avatars. So let's click on this fourth box and actually access the HeyGen platform. And once you create an account, just sign in and go to the bottom left where it shows your name and click on settings. Then on the left-hand side, click on subscriptions and API, HeyGen API, and you can copy your API token right here. So I'm going to click refresh, copy to clipboard, and I'm going to click confirm. Let's head back to the code and paste that in. All right, so let's paste that in. And now let's begin the implementation in our bot.py file. So back in the docs, we don't see too much of the actual implementation, but they do give us a command to install the required dependency. So let's copy this to do so in our code. Let's paste in this command, but remember, we're not using pip, we are using uv for our package manager. So let's go ahead and delete this and just write in uv add. And then this should add HeyGen to our pyproject.tlml file. So if we go ahead and check it out, we see HeyGen in our list of dependencies. All right, so now let's clear this out. And the first thing we need to do in our code is add our HeyGen imports. Add in these two lines exactly. We're just importing a few things we need for the avatar, as well as one more input for asynchronous input output. And you can do that like so, AIO, HTTP. All right, now for the actual code, let's scroll all the way down to our run bot function right here. Since HeyGen is an online service, our HeyGen video service needs a way to make network requests to their API. So right here is where we're going to use that AIO HTTP that we imported, which is great for handling asynchronous network requests. Okay, so we need everything to be indented in the run bot function wrapped inside of this new session. So I'm just going to indent like so. So this creates a client session object, which efficiently manages our bot's connection to HeyGen servers. And the async with statement is important because it automatically handles setting up and tearing down this connection properly, even if errors happen. And we're going to use this session variable when we initialize the avatar now. Let's initialize the avatar right under the LLM like so. So we are accessing our API key, which we set in the environment file. We are passing in the session that we made above. And we also have to pass in this session request variable using this new session request object, choosing the avatar we wanted. So I just chose an avatar from HeyGen's interactive library and specified the version and quality of the avatar. And let's make sure that we include HeyGen in the pipeline after text to speech. Also, you want to make sure you allow interruptions in the pipeline parameters like so. And then in our transport parameters, all the way down here in our main bot function, we do have to add several things for video and make sure to add these in. So you're just making sure that video out is enabled, that it's live, and then configuring some other settings. And let's do the same with web RTC like so. And that is all we need to do to set up and run our real-time avatar. Now, one thing I also want to do is edit the voice. So let's head over to Cartesia. Now in Cartesia, go to library and then click on voices, and you can play around these voices and see which one you like. So I'll just pick something random like Brooke right here. But in order to use this voice, just go to the three dots and click on copy ID. So let's head back to our bot.py file. And where we have our text-to-speech initialized and the voice ID parameter, we can just delete that and paste in what we just copied. All right, so now we are done. Let's go ahead and test that our AI avatar is showing up with the voice that we chose from Cartesia. Let's run UV run bot.py and let that load. Hopefully we get no errors. And we got some warning, but the good news is our components loaded successfully and our front end is up and running. So I'm going to press connect and our avatar should show up in this bot video box right here.
Hello, welcome to our creative agency. I'm here to help you get started. May I have your name, please?
Yeah, my name is James.
Thank you, James. To help us find the best fit for your needs, could you share your approximate project budget?
Yeah, I think my budget is around 6,000.
Got it. And what is your ideal timeline for this project? For example, are you looking to get started ASAP, within a few weeks, or on a specific date?
Yeah, I'm looking to get started within a few weeks.
Great, James. And finally, could you tell me what specific service you're looking for? For example, do you need a new website, automation for your business, or something else?
I'm looking for automation for my business.
That sounds like a great fit for what we do. To get you booked in with one of our specialists, could you please share the best email address to send your calendar invite to?
Yeah, that's jim@gmail.com.
Thank you for your time, James. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day.
Our avatar agent showed up with the voice that we chose from Cartesia, and it accurately followed the conversational flow we set up with Pipecat flows. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.